I actually have a question.
Okay.
I have a buyer under contract with a time clause at a home, but I have another buyer who wants to see that same home. So I'm not exactly sure. My other buyer has actually seen the home. They never put an offer on it. So I showed it to another buyer and they put an offer on it. We got accepted with the time clause. And now this other buyer wants to come back and see it again. I don't know what the best way to handle that is, or just show it to him. And I don't know how to.
Yes, you can show it to them. It gets sticky when if they want to write an offer. Just because they do have, I mean, you do have a fiduciary to both buyers. So
Right.
there'll need to be some disclosure so I mean, I probably wouldn't do anything with it until after you've shown it and
Uh-huh.
see what they say. Because if they decide not to write anything, there's nothing you need to do about it. But if they want to write an offer on it and it's going to affect your first buyer, then you're gonna need to do some kind of disclosure. Russ, do you know a strategy for that other than disclosing it?
Yeah, I think we would just need to fully disclose, although part of me feels like if they are interested, you probably ought to let another agent write that offer, because it's almost like you're becoming a limited agent for 3 people, and I just don't know that really works. So if you were going to do it, I would say you'd need to disclose, you know, so that everybody's clear, everybody understands.
But it's probably best just to have another realtor write the offer.
I think so.
Okay, I agree. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, anytime you're messing with your fiduciary duties with one of your clients, it's best to have somebody else help you with that too. So, but I would probably just start with showing them and then see if there's anything there, because if there's nothing there, then there's no need to worry about it.
Okay,
But
that's a
question.
They've already seen the home 4 times and things like that. I don't want to see. But they're seeing a bunch of other homes as well. It's not the only home they're looking at. So I'll just wait and see what they want to do with it. If they want to present an offer, I'll just let them know that I'll have to get another realtor to help them with that.
Yeah.
Or they can choose a realtor. Okay, thank you.
Yep, perfect. Any other questions? Okay, so today we are going to talk all things earnest money. We've had some issues with earnest money, and we've had some misunderstandings with earnest money, and some, may I say, laziness with earnest money, not paying attention to it. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to share with you the part in the contract that deals with earnest money. So the very first section, you should be able to see the REPC. Okay, so at the very start here, it talks about earnest money. Earnest money deposit on this offer reference date. So the day you write the contract, buyer's name here, offers to purchase from, seller's name here. The property described below and agreed to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance, as defined in section 23. So, so we have 4 calendar days to do this. The question that I want to propose to you is, what happens if we are not going to meet that deadline?
We need to do an addendum extending.
Okay, you need to do an addendum, and we need to extend that deadline. So now here's the interesting thing. Let's say that anytime we're adding an addendum to a contract, we need both parties to agree to it. We need the buyer to agree to it, and we need the seller to agree to it. So if the buyer doesn't have their earnest money in, and they write up an addendum to extend the date because for some reason they can't get their money in those 4 days, and the seller refuses to sign that contract, or never sees it, or doesn't sign it, or just doesn't want to sign it, what is the problem we've created for ourselves?
Well, the contract becomes voidable.
Contract
seller?
does become voidable, and who's at default?
The buyer.
The buyer is in default. Okay, so this is something that I find that we kind of blow through on earnest money. We don't talk about it with our clients very much. It usually consists of a real short, oh yeah, we have to put earnest money down. Don't worry, you'll get the earnest money back at the end. Not a big deal. How much earnest money do you want to put down? That's the conversation. The conversation I want you guys to start having about earnest money is, how much earnest money do you want to put down? Where is that earnest money coming from? How quickly can you get that earnest money to us? Because if you put that addendum in the contract prior to it being accepted, then you'll at least be able to protect your client. But if you just go and put, let's say they put $5,000 in there, and in their mind, they're thinking, oh, I get paid on Friday this week, so not a big deal. I'll be able to get that Friday. And you're writing this offer on Monday, and you're thinking, oh, not a big deal. And then Friday comes around and they have some kind of hiccup with their HR and their financing department, and the paychecks, we get the lovely letter that says, hey, it won't come out till Monday. And now all of a sudden you're in trouble because we didn't have that conversation with our client. Sometimes it's really easy for us to say, oh, we'll just put an addendum and extend it for another couple days. But we've got to realize that when we're doing an addendum, that we're putting the power into the hands of the other party to say yes or no. And if another offer comes in and they're waiting for you to either cancel, that's their way of saying, no, I'm not going to sign it. You've got that obligation to make sure that you look at that. So I want you to be a little bit more cautious with that. The reason I bring that up is, so this week, Russ and I got notifications from the division. We have 4 complaints against our company this week alone, and we haven't seen, I think they must have just had a backlog of complaints. But we haven't seen one for a really long time. And then we got 4 already this week. Now, 3 of them aren't really that big of a deal, but one of them deals with earnest money. And the earnest money problem that created was the buyer never deposited the earnest money. The agent never did anything about it. And then towards the middle of the transaction, the agent decided that they needed to fix it because as a compliance department and everyone looking at your file, they're going to flag it and say, hey, you're out of compliance with your earnest money. You need to do an addendum to fix this. And so she went and did an addendum, and then the seller refusing to sign it created this problem for her client in this situation. So we need to notify them. So one of the things that's our responsibility, let's say that earnest money is due today and the 4 days is up today, and your client notifies you that earnest money is not coming in, like they're not going to be able to bring it in today. They're not going to get paid until Monday. What is our process? Obviously, if we could do an addendum and change the date till Monday, that protects everybody in the transaction. But what is our process? Your client calls you up right now and says, hey, just to let you know, I can't get the earnest money until Monday. What do I do?
Well, we would have to probably do an addendum and make that addendum contingent upon the seller's acceptance. And if they're not going to accept it, we'd probably have to cancel the contract.
Okay, so that's one method. Cancel the contract before that. But now we know that it's not coming in. What should our first step be? Our job as agents is to make sure that everyone is aware of what's going on. So we need to notify the seller's agent that earnest money has not come in yet. So I find that when there's great communication between the buyer's agent and the listing agent, and it's not confrontational, that most times people will work with each other. It's when we get a little bit confrontational or aggressive with what we have that we run into that problem. So one, as our responsibility is not to keep it secret. We have to notify the seller's agent that that money has not come in that time frame. Okay, and then Jeanette, you're absolutely right. You're going to need to make some of those adjustments. So I'm going to go into a little bit more details about this. First is some mistakes that I'm seeing with earnest money. Okay, one mistake that I'm seeing is right here on the top. It specifically says that it's going to be deposited, the earnest money, the receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage. The brokerage to have, let's see, okay, 4 days, deposit the earnest money into the brokerage real estate trust account. So our contract specifically says where it's supposed to be going. So if we decide in the middle of the transaction that we're going to put it somewhere different, we're going to be going against our contract. I've seen this with a lot of agents lately where it automatically, the earnest money ends up in a title company, and we have no documentation saying it should be in a title company and not in the brokerage. So if the seller doesn't agree to put it in a title company, you as an agent should not be putting it in a title company. So then the question is, let's say that they do agree they want to put it in a title company. We have to do an addendum to our contract because our contract specifically says it needs to go in the buyer's brokerage trust account. So we have to address this. You can't just say, well, everybody agreed, it's fine, it's going to be there, because what happens now is if we're not following the contract, when we run into problems. So let's say that they want to put it in a title company. There's a specific addendum, deposit of earnest money with title insurance company, addendum to real estate purchase contract, addendum with the number there. So you're gonna add that to your contract. First part, same thing. The rep C is amended as follows, because this is changing section 1. Buyer and seller agree that earnest money deposit or deposits will be held with the title company instead of depositing with the buyer's brokerage trust account. This is directly talking about that section. It's just saying it's going to now be in a title company. And then there's this little disclaimer right here. This is one that I want to make sure that we understand, because it can affect getting your earnest money back. And it's just bold letters. Buyer and seller are advised that the title insurance company may require, through separate written instructions, that both the buyer and the seller mutually authorize disbursement of earnest money deposits, even if the REPC states that no additional written authorization is required, which may result in additional delays and costs for either party to receive the earnest money deposits. So when you put it with the title company, even though our contracts say no other written authorization is required, those contracts are between your buyer and seller. They're not, you cannot obligate somebody else in the contract. So we cannot obligate the title company to make their personal decisions based on what our contracts say. They're not a party to our contracts. So they have the right to hold their earnest money, and most of them do, because they don't want to run into a problem of releasing earnest money to the wrong person, and they're not deciphering who the right and wrong person is. They're going to require both parties to sign. So I want you to think of a scenario here where, in this case, the buyer decides they're going to cancel the contract. The earnest money was not deposited on time, but they were going through the contract. We passed the deadlines for a long ways, and then all of a sudden we say, hey, we're going to cancel based off of our financing deadline, and we're getting our earnest money back. And the seller says, no, you don't get your earnest money back because you didn't deposit your earnest money on time, so we get the earnest money. Now all of a sudden you've got a problem with one of them not willing to release that earnest money, and that earnest money can sit in the title company for a very long time and not come back to your client. So if your buyer's saying, I don't want to buy this home, I'm going to go buy another home, and they got their earnest money stuck in a title company that the seller won't release, then you're going to have to come up with different earnest money for a different offer, because this one is going to be stuck there until you get both parties to agree or a court decides where that money's going. So just keep in mind that that's the risk that we're running when we don't deposit it into a title company. So one question I get a lot on this is earnest money this right here, it says earnest money into brokerage real estate account. So then the question is, what if you're dealing with a company like Equity, who they like to put all of their earnest money in the title company, and they're the buyer? Can we put that earnest money in our trust account?
Yes, I do that all the time. I do an addendum saying that the earnest money will be deposited into the seller's brokerage at Century 21 Everest.
Okay, so you can definitely do that. The question that I would have is, do you need another addendum saying that it needs to go to the seller's brokerage versus the buyer's brokerage? Does anyone have a thought on that?
I just assumed that you would need an addendum because it would have to be agreed upon by both parties.
Okay, so you're going down the right path. My question is, when you read this paragraph, does it say anywhere in here which brokerage trust account it's going to?
No, does it? I can't read. It's too small.
Oh, is it too small?
I just made it bigger on my end.
Anybody else? Jeanette, thanks for participating. Everyone else is
Yeah,
just
let somebody else speak.
No, but wouldn't you want an addendum so that you know, like at the end when they're doing all the commission report, that they know where it is and who to credit?
when who's doing a commission report? When the company is?
Or, yeah, I mean, you still got to know where the money is.
Yeah, so where would it need to be? I mean, I like where you guys are going, because what you're doing is you're making things more clear. But what I'm saying is, this talks about the brokerage real estate account, which is either buyer's brokerage or seller's brokerage. So either one satisfies this agreement. What you guys are doing is great, and I'm glad that you guys are thinking in that direction, because that's helpful for any of them. As far as us as a brokerage knowing whether there's money there, we will have it in our trust account or we will not have it in our trust account. So when we go to close a file, there'll either be money in the trust account or there'll not be money in the trust account. The biggest thing that I want you to look at here is, this is the next page here. This is what we're going to want in our file. So the confirmation of receipt of earnest money. We want something like this, so we know where the money is and that it was actually brought in. Okay, does that make sense? So Jeanette, what you're doing is fine. I think that's great. The only time you need an addendum is if we're not putting it in a brokerage real estate account. We're putting it in somewhere other than a brokerage real estate account. Then we need to do an addendum, which would be this deposit of earnest money in a title insurance company.
So my question is, if you get a offer and they say they're putting the money in the title and you don't want to agree to that, you're still going to have to do an addendum saying earnest money will be deposited into either the seller or the buyer's brokerage account, because you're not going to agree that it's going to be deposited into the title company.
Right. Yes.
Right.
If they're putting it in an addendum that they want you to put it in a title company, and your client doesn't want it there, then you would have to counter that addendum. Yes. And you would have to define what you want done with that, because the title company addendum is saying we want it in a title company. And there's times where it's actually valuable to put it in a title company. I mean, I've seen ones where it's a cash deal and it's going to close really quickly, and instead of having monies come here and there, it's just easier to put in the title company. That's one situation, that putting in a title company is not a bad idea. The other idea is, and I'm not really sure, maybe Russ, you have an idea on this, but a really high earnest money, as a brokerage, we don't want to hold a lot of earnest money. We had an earnest money check that wanted to be deposited either this week or last week. There was $150,000 earnest money check. We don't want to put that liability on the company. We'll probably put that in a title company. So there's an amount, and I don't know, Russ, do you know if there's a specific number we go off of?
No, there's not really a specific number. I would say though, once you start getting really probably even over 50,000 is when we're gonna probably start to say, let's put it in the title company. So I wouldn't say we have a hard, fast rule on that, but
Yeah, but if the numbers start getting up there higher, we'll put it in the title company because we don't want that liability as a company. But that's how you would do that. You would do a counter offer to the offer coming in saying, I don't want it in the title company. Though the mistakes I'm seeing lately is that they're just depositing it in the title company. From the title company standpoint, they're not looking at the contract saying, oh, you can't deposit it here. It's being deposited in the title company, and then we're getting word, oh yeah, it's deposited, it's just with the title company, and nobody agreed that it would be in a title company. We don't want to be the agent creating that problem in our company. So use that addendum. Then confirmation of earnest money receipt. Only be signing this if you're turning in the earnest money. We had a situation last year where the agent signed a confirmation of earnest money and then left the check in their desk upstairs and never brought it down to the office. So the office never showed that we received it, but the agent said they received it. And then we found it in their desk before it was ready to close, which created its own kind of problems. So don't do that. Turn it into the office. On earnest money, there's two ways to do it. One is to bring it into the office. The other is to use the app Earnest. If you run into a problem where your client can't drive the check down to you or get a check, go to the bank, using Earnest will help your client get that earnest money in quickly. So if your deadline is today, they can't drive down today, and they said, well, I'll drive down on Monday. And you don't want to just say, oh, we'll get the earnest money on Monday, we'll do an addendum, because that could create a problem for your client. You might as well just use the Earnest app. And I think it's like $11 to $15 or something like that. But for earnest money, it's worth going through that process. Okay, let's say that you go through the transaction and then there is a question on where the earnest money would go if there was a cancellation. If at any time you cancel the contract and there is a question mark on, does it go to the seller or does it go to the buyer? The office is going to require you to do a resolution of earnest money dispute. Okay, so if there's anything unclear, even if it's just a minor thing that says there's a chance it could go to the seller, even though your buyer says, well, I'm canceling based on due diligence. So in this particular case with the complaint we got this week, if the buyer says, oh, I want to cancel based on due diligence, but their earnest money deposit was not brought in on time and nobody signed the addendum to extend the time, well, now we have a scenario where the buyer could be at default and the seller could, we could have that scenario where the buyer could be at default or the buyer could not be at default. And if that's the case, and we have that unclear, we're going to require you to do this resolution of earnest money dispute, which is basically what the title company is requiring, where they're going to make the buyer and the seller agree that this is where the money's going. So the scenario that I've heard with this is, let's say that the buyer does lose their earnest money. And we've had this happen a few times where the seller says, I'm not going to take their earnest money. You can go ahead and give it back to them. I've got another offer. I'm going to move forward. So sometimes that's a scenario that happens. We still are going to have this resolution come about where they're going to mutually release it. So even if contractually it says the buyer deserves the earnest money, if the seller and the buyer both agree that the money is going to go to back to the buyer, or even splitting it half and half, or whatever they end up doing, we're going to go off of this resolution of earnest money dispute, but we're going to require it. So don't be shocked if you try to cancel your contract and there's some kind of a vagueness in it that the office comes back and says, we want you to do this resolution because we want to make sure that we're covered. Nothing's worse than us releasing earnest money to find out later we shouldn't have released earnest money. That's going to cause big problems for us as a brokerage. So if you end up in a situation where this is required, we just ask you to go get it for us. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about earnest money, and then we'll be done for today unless you have any questions. But the question comes up with mobile homes. Okay, mobile homes, we have a contract. Obviously, you probably all know that mobile homes aren't necessarily real property, but we still can sell them. So we have our own contract that we've created, and other brokerages have created contracts that deal with mobile homes. The biggest difference for this is mobile homes, we don't accept earnest money here. We won't hold the earnest money. The buyer can hold the earnest money, the seller can hold the earnest money. Typically a title agent's not going to hold the earnest money because they're not doing title work on it. But as a brokerage, our policy is we don't hold earnest money for mobile homes. So you've got to come up with another solution for your earnest money because we're not going to hold it. Any questions on any of that? Get your earnest money in on time. Don't assume that the seller is going to accept an addendum just because of circumstances that are out of everyone's control. Just, I would say the biggest thing is before you go under contract, have the conversation about how much earnest money, where's the earnest money coming from? Is it easily accessible? Because for us, it's like, oh yeah, you can go get your earnest money, but somebody else might be thinking, oh, I get paid in the middle of the month, I'll just deposit my earnest money at that point. So don't do those things. Okay, any questions or let's see, there was some questions in the chat. I think they're all taken care of though. Okay, so any other questions? Anything else on your guys' mind not pertaining to earnest money? Okay. Thanks for coming today. If you have any questions, always reach out. We're here to help you when we can. Just have a great weekend.